There is a moment in every argument where speaking more actually makes you weaker, not stronger. Most people never notice this moment because they are too busy trying to win with words. They raise their voice, repeat their point, defend every accusation, and explain themselves over and over, believing that enough talking will eventually force the other person to agree. But there is a different kind of power hiding in plain sight, one that most people are too afraid to use. Silence. Not silence out of weakness or defeat, but silence used deliberately, as a weapon sharper than any argument could ever be. This is the principle almost no one understands until it is too late. The person who says the least often walks away holding the most power. Why talking more makes you weaker, not stronger. Most people believe that winning an argument requires having the last word. They think persuasion is a numbers game, that if they present enough points, enough evidence, enough passionate defense, the other person will eventually concede. But human psychology rarely works this way. The more you talk, especially in a moment of conflict, the more information you give away, and information given away in the heat of an argument is rarely used in your favor. Think about what happens when someone is criticized and immediately begins defending themselves. They explain their intentions, they list their reasons, they try to justify every decision in real time. On the surface, this looks like confidence. In reality, it communicates something entirely different. It tells the other person that their opinion has enough power over you to require an immediate, detailed response. Robert Greene often explains that those who react instantly reveal their hand before they have had time to think clearly, while those who pause reveal nothing at all. This is the hidden cost of over-explaining during conflict. Every word spoken under pressure is a word that cannot be taken back. Every justification offered reveals a little more about what truly matters to you, what triggers you, and where your insecurities live. The person on the other side of the argument, whether they intend to or not, is collecting this information. They begin to understand exactly which words provoke a reaction, exactly which accusations make you defensive, and exactly how far they need to push before you lose your composure entirely. Now compare this to someone who responds with restraint. They listen, they pause, they choose their words carefully, or they choose not to speak at all. This behavior creates an entirely different psychological effect. Instead of revealing information, it withholds it. The other person cannot predict what you are thinking because you have given them nothing to work with. This uncertainty is uncomfortable, and discomfort in the middle of a conflict often works in favor of whoever can tolerate it the longest. There is a deeper reason why excessive talking weakens your position during confrontation. Human beings, when nervous or defensive, tend to fill silence. If you speak too much too quickly, you are often filling silence that did not need to be filled. You are solving a problem that had not yet fully formed. This premature response frequently leads to overcorrection, saying more than necessary, revealing more than intended, or making promises and admissions you would not have made if you had simply waited a few seconds longer before responding. Consider two people involved in the same disagreement. The first immediately raises their voice, interrupts, and tries to overpower the conversation with volume and speed. The second remains calm, allows the other person to finish speaking completely, and responds only once, briefly, without emotional escalation. Observers of this interaction rarely walk away impressed by the first person's intensity. They walk away noticing the second person's control. Control, in almost every social situation, reads as strength, while urgency, no matter how justified it feels internally, often reads as desperation. This does not mean staying silent forever or refusing to communicate at all. It means recognizing that not every provocation requires an immediate verbal response. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in an argument is nothing at all, at least not right away. The pause itself becomes a statement. It tells the other person that their words did not have the power to force an instant reaction from you, and that alone often shifts the entire balance of the conversation. Once you understand why talking more weakens your position, the next step is learning how silence actively works in your favor during a disagreement, not just as an absence of words, but as a deliberate psychological tool. How silence actively works against your opponent's silence is often misunderstood as passive, as though choosing not to speak means choosing not to engage. But strategic silence is one of the most active psychological tools available in any confrontation. It does something words rarely accomplish. It forces the other person to sit with the discomfort of their own accusation, unanswered, unresisted, and completely exposed to their own thoughts. When someone attacks you verbally, whether through criticism, insult, or manipulation, they are usually expecting a specific response. They expect defensiveness, anger, or justification, because these are the reactions most people default to. When you withhold that expected reaction, you interrupt a pattern their mind was prepared to receive. Robert Greene frequently describes this disruption as one of the most disorienting experiences a person can create for an opponent, because human beings rely heavily on anticipated reactions to guide their next move. Remove the expected reaction, and their strategy collapses before it even begins. Think about what happens internally when someone insults you and you say nothing. There is a brief pause where they wait for your response. When that response does not come, uncertainty creeps in. Did the insult land? Did it not matter at all? Are you calculating something? Are you simply unaffected? This uncertainty is uncomfortable for the person who delivered the insult because their intention was to provoke a reaction, and without one, they are left wondering whether their attempt succeeded or completely missed its mark. That doubt alone often accomplishes more than any counterargument could. There is another important psychological effect at play here. Silence forces the other person to fill the empty space, and people rarely fill silence with strength. They fill it with over-explanation, backtracking, or further escalation that exposes even more of their intentions. Watch closely the next time someone pushes for a reaction and receives none. Often, they will repeat themselves, rephrase the accusation, or attempt a different angle entirely, revealing far more about their underlying motive than they intended to share. Meanwhile, you have said nothing, given away nothing, and remained completely composed throughout. This dynamic shifts the entire structure of the conflict. Arguments typically operate on an exchange. One person speaks, the other responds, and the cycle repeats until someone runs out of points or patience. When you remove yourself from that exchange through deliberate silence, the argument as the other person understood it can no longer continue the way they expected. They are left essentially arguing into open space, and there is very little satisfaction in winning an argument that no one else is participating in. Silence also protects you from a specific trap many people fall into during conflict: the trap of trying to make the other person understand your perspective in real time. In the middle of heightened emotion, most people are not actually listening. They are waiting for their turn to speak again. Explaining yourself in this moment often accomplishes nothing except giving the other person more material to argue against. Waiting until emotions have settled and choosing your words deliberately rather than reactively almost always produces a more effective outcome than trying to reason with someone who is not currently capable of reasoning back. There is a particular kind of confidence that silence communicates, one that words simply cannot replicate. When you choose not to respond to provocation, you are implicitly stating that the provocation did not require a response, that your peace was not disturbed enough to demand immediate defense. This message, delivered without a single word, often carries more psychological weight than the most articulate rebuttal ever could. People sense composure the same way they sense panic, and composure under pressure is almost universally read as strength. Once you understand how silence actively unsettles the person trying to provoke you, the next step is learning how to distinguish powerful silence from avoidant silence. Because not all silence carries strength, and confusing the two can quietly undermine the very advantage you are trying to build. The difference between powerful silence and avoidant silence: not all silence is created equal, and this distinction matters enormously. There is a version of silence that radiates control, and there is a version that radiates fear. And while they may look identical from the outside, the people experiencing them can almost always sense the difference. Understanding this distinction is essential, because using silence incorrectly can quietly damage relationships and credibility rather than strengthen them. Powerful silence comes from choice. It is the deliberate decision not to engage with a provocation because engaging would not serve you, not because you are incapable of responding. This kind of silence is calm, unhurried, and completely unshaken. The person practicing it could speak if they wanted to. They simply choose not to because they understand that some battles are not worth entering, and some reactions only feed the very conflict they wish to avoid. Avoidant silence, by contrast, comes from fear. It is the silence of someone who wants to speak but feels too intimidated, too anxious, or too overwhelmed to form the words. This silence often carries visible tension, a tightness in the body, an inability to make eye contact, a desire to escape the situation entirely rather than remain present within it. Robert Greene often notes that true composure requires remaining fully present during discomfort, not retreating from it. Avoidant silence retreats. Powerful silence remains. This difference matters because the psychological effect each type creates is completely opposite. Powerful silence unsettles the other person because it signals control they cannot penetrate. Avoidant silence often invites further pressure, because on some level, people can sense when someone is silent out of fear rather than choice, and unfortunately, this sometimes encourages more aggressive behavior rather than less. Predators, whether literal or metaphorical, tend to press harder when they sense weakness, and avoidant silence can unintentionally signal exactly that. Consider two people who both choose not to respond immediately to an insult. The first maintains steady eye contact, relaxed posture, and an expression that suggests mild indifference rather than distress. Their silence says, "That did not affect me the way you hoped it would." The second avoids eye contact, appears visibly uncomfortable, and seems to be searching for an exit from the conversation. Their silence says something entirely different. It says, "I do not know how to handle this." Both are silent. Only one of them holds power in that silence. This is why developing powerful silence requires more than simply refusing to speak. It requires internal regulation, the ability to remain calm enough that your body language does not betray anxiety even when your mind is working through a difficult moment. This is a skill built over time, not something that appears automatically the first time someone attempts to use silence strategically. Early attempts often feel uncomfortable, even artificial, because most people are unaccustomed to sitting in tension without immediately trying to resolve it through words. There is also an important ethical distinction worth addressing here. Powerful silence is not about punishing someone through the withdrawal of communication indefinitely, nor is it about using silence manipulatively to control another person's emotions through confusion or anxiety. That version of silence, sometimes referred to as stonewalling, can be deeply damaging to relationships built on genuine connection. The silence being described here is specific to moments of provocation, conflict, or attempted manipulation, not a permanent communication style used to avoid resolution altogether. Healthy relationships still require honest conversation once emotions have settled. Strategic silence is a tool for the heat of the moment, not a replacement for real communication afterward. The goal is never to become someone who refuses to engage with others meaningfully. The goal is to become someone who chooses their moments of engagement deliberately, rather than being pulled into every conflict simply because someone else demanded a reaction. This distinction between chosen silence and fearful silence is what separates genuine strength from something that merely resembles it on the surface. Once you understand the difference between powerful and avoidant silence, the next step is learning exactly when silence should be used, because timing determines whether this tool becomes an asset or a liability. Knowing when silence is the right move, silence is a powerful tool, but like any tool, its effectiveness depends entirely on when and how it is applied. Used at the wrong moment, silence can appear dismissive, cold, or even cowardly. Used at the right moment, it becomes nearly impossible to counter. Learning to recognize the difference is what separates those who wield silence effectively from those who misuse it and unintentionally damage their relationships or credibility. The first situation where silence proves most powerful is during moments of intentional provocation, when someone is clearly trying to bait an emotional reaction rather than engage in genuine discussion. This often shows up as insults disguised as jokes, exaggerated accusations designed to provoke defensiveness, or repeated attempts to pull you into an argument that has no real resolution, only escalation. In these moments, responding verbally often plays directly into the other person's intention. They wanted a reaction, and giving them one, even a defensive one, confirms that their strategy worked. Silence, in this specific context, denies them exactly what they were seeking. The second situation where silence serves you well is during moments of high emotional intensity, whether that intensity belongs to you or to the other person. Robert Greene frequently emphasizes that decisions made in emotional states are rarely decisions made well. Words spoken in anger are almost always words regretted later, because anger distorts judgment and prioritizes immediate release over long-term consequence. Pausing, allowing the emotional wave to settle before responding, prevents this kind of regret and allows your eventual words, if you choose to speak them, to come from clarity rather than reaction. The third situation involves moments where you do not yet have enough information to respond wisely. Sometimes silence is not a strategic weapon at all, simply an honest acknowledgement that you need time to think before forming a position. There is nothing weak about saying, "I need time before I respond to that." You're simply choosing not to respond immediately while you gather your thoughts. This kind of silence protects you from committing to a position prematurely, one you might regret once you have had time to consider the situation more fully. However, silence is not always the correct choice, and recognizing when to speak is equally important. There are moments when clear, direct communication is necessary, particularly in relationships built on trust and mutual respect. If someone genuinely misunderstands your intentions, and a simple clarification would resolve unnecessary conflict, withholding that clarification purely to appear powerful serves no real purpose. Silence used as a manipulation tactic to create unnecessary confusion or anxiety in someone who deserves honesty is not strength. It is a misuse of the very principle being discussed. The key distinction lies in intention. Silence used to protect your composure, avoid feeding unnecessary conflict, or create space for clearer thinking is strategic and healthy. Silence used to punish, manipulate, or avoid necessary accountability is manipulative and ultimately damaging, both to the relationship and to your own integrity. Powerful people understand this difference instinctively. They use silence as a shield during conflict, not as a weapon to withhold connection from people who genuinely deserve honesty and resolution. There is also a practical consideration in professional or public settings where prolonged silence in response to a direct question can sometimes be misinterpreted as evasiveness rather than composure. In these situations, brief, controlled responses paired with strategic restraint often work better than complete silence. The goal is never silence for its own sake. The goal is measured communication, where every word spoken serves a clear purpose, and where unnecessary words are withheld specifically because they would weaken your position rather than strengthen it. Mastering this timing requires practice and self-awareness. It requires pausing before reacting, evaluating whether a response is truly necessary, and recognizing the difference between conflict that deserves your engagement and provocation that only deserves your composure. Over time, this evaluation becomes instinctive, allowing you to move through difficult conversations with a level of control that most people never develop, simply because they never paused long enough to consider whether speaking was actually the right choice in that specific moment. Once you understand when silence should be used, the final step is learning how consistent, disciplined silence builds a lasting reputation that makes people think twice before ever trying to provoke you again. How silence builds a reputation that protects you long-term. Every time you choose composed silence over reactive defense, you are not just managing a single conversation. You are building a reputation, one that extends far beyond any individual argument and shapes how people approach you in every future interaction. This is perhaps the most underestimated benefit of mastering strategic silence. Its effects compound over time, creating a kind of psychological protection that active arguing could never provide. Robert Greene often explores how reputation functions as a form of power that operates even when you are not present. People remember patterns far more than isolated incidents. If your pattern consistently shows that provocation does not rattle you, that insults do not produce visible reactions, and that you remain composed regardless of how intensely someone tries to provoke a response, this pattern becomes known. It precedes you into future interactions, often discouraging the very provocations that once tested your composure in the first place. Think about why certain people rarely get challenged, insulted, or manipulated, while others seem to attract constant conflict. Often, the difference lies not in luck, but in established reputation. People who have consistently demonstrated calm, controlled responses to provocation become known as difficult to unsettle. Potential provocateurs, consciously or unconsciously, begin avoiding confrontation with them, not because they fear retaliation, but because they sense there is nothing to gain. There is no emotional payoff in provoking someone who refuses to provide one. This reputation extends beyond direct confrontation. It shapes how people perceive your overall presence. Someone known for composed silence during conflict is often perceived as more trustworthy, more stable, and more emotionally mature than someone known for reactive outbursts. Even people who have never personally witnessed your composure firsthand often hear about it through others. And reputation, once established, tends to shape first impressions before any real interaction even begins. There is a compounding psychological effect worth understanding here. Every time you successfully use strategic silence during conflict, you reinforce your own internal belief that you are capable of remaining calm under pressure. This self-perception becomes increasingly solid over time, making future instances of composed silence progressively easier to access. What once required significant willpower to maintain eventually becomes second nature, an automatic response rather than a conscious effort. This is how discipline, applied consistently, gradually becomes identity. This reputation also changes the nature of relationships around you. People who might otherwise test boundaries repeatedly begin adjusting their behavior in advance because they have learned through observed pattern that provocation does not produce the reaction they might be seeking elsewhere. This does not mean people stop disagreeing with you or challenging your ideas. Healthy disagreement remains valuable and should never be discouraged. What decreases is unnecessary provocation, manipulation, and attempts to control your emotional state through confrontation, because your established pattern has already demonstrated that these tactics simply do not work. There is a final, often overlooked benefit to this reputation. It creates space for genuine, respectful conflict resolution when it is truly needed. Because you are not known for reacting impulsively or defensively, when you do choose to speak seriously about a genuine concern, your words carry significantly more weight. People understand that if you have decided something is worth addressing directly, it must genuinely matter rather than being another emotional reaction among many. Scarcity, once again, creates value, and words that are rarely spoken in anger become words that are taken far more seriously when they finally are. In the end, the power of silence was never about winning individual arguments, though it often accomplishes that as a byproduct. It was about building a version of yourself that cannot be easily manipulated, provoked, or controlled through conflict. It was about understanding that the strongest response to an attempt at emotional manipulation is often no response at all, delivered not from fear, but from a deep, internal understanding of your own worth and composure. Once that understanding becomes consistent, silence stops being a tactic you occasionally remember to use. It becomes simply who you are, and that quiet, unshakable presence becomes one of the most powerful forms of strength a person can possess.